After a decade of hard work, I finally gained the know-how to become a technical consultant. I developed a skill set that lets me find work for myself. Now, after 4 years of hustling, work comes to me, filling up my week about half the time. This gives me more free time than most people. In my free time, I like to go to antique shops and flea markets, buy cheap items and sell them to dealers. I also sell on eBay, where I'm known as an A-picker. I have a lot of niche collectibles, including old weapons of all kinds. I'm not so interested in guns, but rather in edged weapons like knives, swords and similar craftsman weapons, powder horns and other artisan items. I also make GU stuff, although I don't make huge money from it. It's fun though, and all cash, so it's untraceable to both the IRS and my wife for my own collection. I like artisan. I mostly collect weapons, particularly clubs, saps and brass knuckles. Many of the clubs are wooden and often carved or decorated as part of gang activities. Saps look like short billy clubs, but are made of leather sacks filled with lead shot and flexibly attached to a handle. When in use, they're about 12 and long but folded, they fit comfortably in your pocket. Pocket knives are more common, and they're made by casting, welding, blacksmithing or machining. Most knives were poorly made by people in trade schools, but the valuable ones are works of art and rarely to be found. My wife works in a large office as an accountant. She's not so fond of the work, but she likes her colleagues. Over the 6 or 7 years she's worked for the firm, I've gotten to know quite a lot of the workers. As with all women, she has some good friends. Denise and Fiona are 2 of them. When we have dinner, we usually talk about them and other people in the company. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a normal day was when a new manager showed up, and Martin Wolf entered our dinner conversation. He was 2 or 3 levels above my wife, but it's a little hard to tell exactly where he sits in the organization, because matrix management blurs the lines of who works for whom in my wife's mind. He was a big improvement on the guy he replaced. She thought the new guy would fix all the mistakes the last one made, make none of his own, and generally run the company as she imagined it should be run. A few weeks later, hearing yet another story of wisdom from Martin, I thought a new manager he often plants wet kisses in everybody's ear, to develop goodwill while he gathers information and knowledge of the people in business. Then when a strategy is formed, he lowers the boom and fires some, leaving the rest with no choice but to comply. I was surprised when Karen suddenly went from idle conversation to shouting in 5 seconds. How dare he? I never actually met Martin, and I don't think he'd do something like that. I was just trying to make her angry to make her see reason. She stabbed her napkin into her dinner plate and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I guess I hit a nerve. Oh well. She retreated to the bedroom, where she wouldn't suffer too much since she had just finished her dinner. She ate a lot, so I guess she likes to eat a lot. She calmed down in a day or so, but in the weeks to come, Wolf got no mention whatsoever at dinner time. A few days later, we got a frightening call at midnight. My wife's best friend was calling to say her husband Aaron had been assaulted on their doorstep and she was in danger. My wife told her to call the police, but Aaron wouldn't let her. She said we should do it anyway, as we could get there quicker than they could. We were getting dressed in the car. As I drove the 7 miles to their house, Julia and Karen stayed on the phone, talking the whole time. We pulled into their driveway and Karen jumped out before the car stopped. She almost took the car door off because the car was stopping faster than she could. Aaron was working the second shift and got home at 11. At 30, he walked up to his back door when somebody jumped him and worked him over with a club or a bat. He was in agony, but insisted on no police or hospital. Listening to him, we learned he was hitting the balls and ribs with some broken bones on both sides. We wouldn't know for sure until he was x-rayed. We gave him some water and checked him over. I saw a groove on his finger where his wedding ring had been. He screamed when we tried to move him, so he was badly hurt. I told him and the girls that he definitely had broken ribs, so going to the hospital was essential. Broken ribs, besides being painful, can puncture a lung. The women went off to call an ambulance and I leaned down and whispered, "Did you take your wedding ring off or did your assailant take it?" He robbed me right and left, leaving a good watch on the same hand, but your wallet is in your pocket. Look, the guy that did this may do worse to his wife. I might have time to warn her before he gets to her." "Who is she?" I asked. "I didn't see who it was, but he might kill her too. You tell me in confidence or I'll tell your wife. Let's not waste time." "I don't know who did this," I said. Everybody has the right to remain silent. I didn't say anything more while we waited for the ambulance. He told us all what happened in a simple, improbable way. He said he was walking up to the door when he thought he got hit with a taser and fell soundlessly to the ground. He claimed he had no idea who would want to do that. The women went with him to the hospital and I stayed home to protect his 14-year-old. Tim, who is 13, and Carl, who is 14, went back to bed, reassured that their father would be okay. It's 12 a.m. and woke me up in the chair I was sleeping in. Aaron was staying overnight for observation and would be okay, but in serious pain. They still had no idea who did it. I can narrow it down to 3 people. "Ah, how do you know who, what did?" "Aaron told you?" "It wasn't random. There was no crime in his own yard, so it wasn't a random attack. Salent knew him, knew his schedule, planned the job. They must have had a motive. There's no doubt that Aaron was the target. The hit to the balls was an attack on him sexually. It suggests that someone didn't like his genitals or what he was doing with them. Third, they took his wedding ring but left his watch and wallet. It wasn't money they were after. They wanted something else. It seems like he got punished for adultery. I really can't believe it, Chris. There's no proof, but such things happen. Let's think about the possible suspects. It could be your sons, Tim or Carl. One of them could have found evidence of what their dad had been doing. They might think they were protecting their mom's honor. The taser could be stolen from a friend's house, or it could be you, Julia. Same motive. You punished him anonymously so you wouldn't have. I think you're making things up, Chris. You say he's been unfaithful and that you've divorced him. I don't believe that for a second. He's not cheating on me. I didn't beat him up, and I certainly didn't do it with the boys. I'm not saying he's telling the truth, but I do think you and the boys had the means and opportunity to do it. My guess is that it's the husband of the woman he's been seeing. I'm really afraid that if the husband did this to him, the guy's wife could be in real danger. That's what I told Aaron, but he didn't seem to understand. Julia was close to tears. I can't believe it. He wouldn't have, of course. I don't know if he was unfaithful to you, but it's the most likely scenario. He denied it to me, but if it's true, there's a chance a woman may be battered or even killed. If he had told me who it was, I might have been able to warn her, but it's too late now. On the way home, Karen asked, would most men go after both the errant wife and her lover? I don't know about most men, but I tell you truly, if you slept with someone else, I'd go after the guy like I would anyone who got between me and my woman. I wouldn't kill them, but they'd feel the pain I'd inflict for the rest of their days. Some men would attack their wife, but I wouldn't hit you or any woman. I'd throw you out and make the divorce as miserable for you as I could. Why were you thinking of getting a little strange? I was thinking of Julia and Aaron. Our lives returned to normal. Aaron's situation had nothing to do with us. One evening, I asked how Martin Wolf was doing. Do you have much contact with him? Does he sit with you at lunch? Since you dislike Martin, I've chosen not to upset you by talking about him. Does that make you happy? No, it doesn't. I'm glad you brought up the subject. For starters, you got upset and had a fit. You ran to our room and left me. I think we can assume that he means much more to you than to me, and you're also right that I've never met him. Secondly, as I recall the conversation from a few weeks ago, I wasn't accusing Martin of anything. I was just mentioning my personal experience with new managers. My main concern here is your attitude. If you're hiding things from me, it suggests there's a reason why you feel the need to hide your interactions with Martin. Of course, I'm using the word Jesus in a positive way. I'm not him. How dare you accuse me of that? I use the word interactions to mean conversation or legitimate business. I admit I use the word to be provocative. A marriage is built on trust. I hold you to the same standards as I hold myself. You know my passwords and you see my telephone records. I have no secrets. I'm where I said I would be, doing what I said I would be doing with who I said I was with, and I'm always available by phone because I'm not hiding anything. I expect the same from you. See, Chris, there you go again. Now you're accusing me of cheating. Keep this up, and it might just happen. Let me tell you, you are not. Karen, I'm just trying to have an honest discussion here. I haven't accused you of anything, let alone cheating. What I'm saying is that we have to be open with each other. Otherwise, little lies build up into big lies, and we'll end up with a marriage built on lies. I believe that everything in life is built on and by truth. If you were to ask me who I went out to dinner with at the office, I would tell you that Joey was with me. However, if I didn't mention the 2 women we met at the bar, I would be lying to you by omission. I would be deliberately misleading you. If you were to later find out that I lied about the dinner, you might reasonably assume that I lied. I don't want to have to answer more questions about who these women were and whether I slept with one or both of them. Do you agree that I shouldn't have to ask permission or even tell you who I see and what we talk about? You're being controlling and unreasonable here. It's only business. There are people I have to go out to lunch with. If you keep this up, our marriage is in trouble. You don't have to ask permission. You just need to mention it later. If we didn't talk about people we interacted with at work, what would we talk about? Our marriage is in trouble right now. Married people do not put themselves in positions where I need to know if there's any doubt about their fidelity. There's no reason not to mention who you're having lunch with and what you're talking about, particularly when it's just one person and not a group. Let's be honest. You usually go out with colleagues, your TV show stars, your boss, and so on. It's pretty common for people in a senior position to go out to lunch with their direct reports and their immediate boss. In my experience, it's pretty impressive when a boss reaches out to someone at a lower level and takes them out to lunch regularly. It's a different story if he takes a whole group out for lunch. It's a bit much if it becomes a regular thing. You both need to think about your reputation. This is something out of a Victorian novel. Think of my reputation. Give me a break. Business is not about sex, although it's apparently hard for you to believe that. Here's what I'll do. I'll go to lunch with whoever I please. Thank you very much. I'll be honest with you about who I go with and when. I might even tell you what we talked about. Does that make you happy? It was all I asked for in the first place. Tell me the truth, and do what you do in the open. If I find you lying to me, there will be hell to pay. As it happened, a couple of nights later, the wife left her office laptop on with the email account. I was curious about reading her emails. I thought, is reading someone's emails like reading someone's diary? I figured that emails are meant to be read by someone, even if it's not me. So I read them to my heart's content. It seemed like she and Martin were taking long lunches about once a week. There wasn't anything wrong with that, but Thursday was usually the day I would be ready when it came down to it. Their lunch spot. I wondered if the Oakwood Hotel had been nicknamed the Oak by locals before it was refurbished. I was in the lobby wearing a fake beard, a black suit, a muted tie, and some tapered strips of black plastic on my eyeglass frames to make them look different. I also wore a fedora I bought at a second-hand store. I figured my wife wouldn't if you see me, it'll be because she's looking for me. And why would she look for me? I had a sap in my pocket, so I figured I might as well try it out. If my fears were realized, I was reading a newspaper when they came in holding hands. I had scoped out the bar and restaurant. The bar was very open and uninviting for secrets, so the restaurant was a better bet for seduction. Neither of them I went to the hotel counter so that, if there was anything on for the afternoon, he would already be registered. I had a sandwich in the bar, otherwise I'd look odd hanging around. I checked on them once during the meal, no messy kisses, just hand-holding above the table. Karen was obviously fascinated by Bozo. Her face had a slight flush, and she was all smiles and laughter. I finished my lunch and I went back to the lobby and read my paper. I was so engrossed in an article that if Karen hadn't laughed as she waited for the elevator, I would have missed them. As it was, they were standing with arms around each other in front of the elevator as the doors were opening. I went across the lobby as quickly as I could, planning to beat the crap out of him the moment the elevator doors closed. As the doors closed, they paused to let a woman off the elevator. I quickly made my way inside, standing beside and slightly behind them. He had his arm around her as he ushered my wife into the elevator. I was right behind her, just inches away. He saw me, but he had no idea who I was. We didn't make eye contact, so I doubt he would have recognized me out of costume. I was prepared for a fight. There was a terrible fight right there, with loud howling and screams. What happened? Well, you could barely have choreographed it for a movie. Fortunately, my wife was all charged up, thinking of her soon-to-be-filled fantasy, so she didn't even notice me getting into the elevator. He pivoted her around him so they both faced the door, and I easily stepped to the back wall behind them, keeping directly behind. He pressed 5 on the elevator panel and glanced at me. I held up 10 fingers. He pressed 10 on the keypad. Karen was excited. He was trying to shush her. I got out my sap. He was a lot shorter than me. I think Karen was taller than him. It didn't seem fair. What I was going to do wasn't even to be a fair fight. I wasn't trying to prove I was better. I just wanted to beat him up. His hand reached down and grabbed her ass. I wanted to hit him, but I stopped myself. I realized the elevator was small. I thought the hallway would be better for the attack. I could move around more. As soon as the door started to open, I reached across and hit the door close. I saw my chance and swung the sap, hitting him hard in the back of his head. It made no great noise and dropped him like a stone. I couldn't have done better if I had practiced. I caught him as he collapsed and dragged him 2 steps back into the elevator just as the door closed. While my wife continued to, he was babbling about the last one in the room and other nonsense. Bozo was out cold, lying on his back with his pants tented out a bit by a still stiff tool. I was filled with a grim joy. I gave him 2 hard kicks to crush his balls and a 3rd kick to his pecker as we passed the 6th floor. I pressed the button for floors 7, 8, and 9 as well as 11, 12, and 14. Hotels are superstitious about 13, so most don't have a 13th. I used the sap to hit him in the face a few times, taking out teeth and mashing his nose. I then used his shirt to wipe the blood off and put it in my pocket. I straightened my tie, picked up my briefcase and stood patiently for the door to open at the next floor. I was surprised that I felt no remorse for what I had done. I would never have struck anyone with intent to harm. I suppose because I felt so justified, I felt no revulsion. A couple of times, the elevator doors opened on the upper floors and I panicked a bit, worried that someone would see what was happening and sound the alarm. When the door opened on the 8th floor, I was done with him, so I stepped out and let him continue his ascent. I hit the down button in a hurry to get out of there. If I'd known I was going to get arrested, I'd have done what I did anyway. I wasn't going to become a martyr. I was shaking and shivering with adrenaline every 15 to 20 seconds. The hardest thing was waiting for the elevator. The other elevator stopped for me, as the floor indicator showed that Bozo was at the 12th floor and rising. I stepped in and glided on. I stopped at the lobby. That's when I realized I might just get away with this. I looked at the floor indicator as I walked out. Bozo was coming down, passing the 11th floor. I didn't look back again. I walked through the bar and out the side door of the hotel. I ducked into McDonald's around the corner. I went into the restroom like Superman, shucking the hat, glasses, and suit, putting on a t-shirt. I got dressed in my jeans and shirt and walked out of the men's room. I strolled 3 blocks to my car and drove home. I shaved my beard off in the car and threw it away. I'd committed a crime, and I was sorely tempted to cut and run. I thought about packing a couple of suitcases with my winter clothes and leaving, but I hadn't really planned for the aftermath. I'd just gone along with it, and I realized that I'd really done there was nothing wrong with beating Wolf up. It was only simple justice. Why should I be the one to further disrupt my life? I moved out and found a new place to live. Besides, her mom lived across town, so it would be no great inconvenience for her to go there. When I got home, I helped her by packing her into 2 suitcases with 3 trash bags for the bulky stuff. I put them in the hall and ordered pizza. I canceled our credit cards using what little savings we had to pay them off. I opened a very good bottle of wine that Karen had been saving for 2 years. Waiting for a special occasion, which this certainly was, I had 3 glasses of it and felt much better. In fact, I was looking forward to the coming confrontation. Karen's story: Jonathan was a great match for her. He lived in New York City, so he wasn't around much and wouldn't become a bother. Plus, he was a marketing consultant for her company, so they could talk and email without her husband intercepting their communications. They were in phone contact daily anyway, and every couple of weeks or so he came to their office for a day or 2. He was slightly shorter than her but very solidly built with a sparkling laugh. He had that fresh scrubbed look and was a bit of a head-turner. They had been flirting harmlessly for weeks and were in her cubicle analyzing a proposal her department made for business that was awarded. He came to their office for a day or 2 every couple of weeks. He was slightly shorter than her but very solidly built with a sparkling laugh. He had that fresh scrubbed look and was impeccably groomed. He was quite the head-turner. They had been flirting harmlessly for weeks and were in her cubicle analyzing a proposal her department made for business that had been awarded. To others, he was leaning over her shoulder as she was paging through the proposal on her computer. He realized with embarrassment just how bad it was, given her new training. She was wearing a blouse that was a bit low-cut for office wear, so when she glanced up she saw he was staring at her breasts. "Display your nasty man. Stop that." She kept her voice down. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, making her shiver as he whispered, "Undo one more button for me." She paused, clutching her blouse to her breastbone. This was past flirting. It was something else. She knew what would happen if she did this. "Please," he added. She released her clutched blouse, she made a decision and, with her fingertips, undid one button. The green light meant she could go ahead. He leaned over her and pointed to one corner of the computer screen. He said, "Show me what's down there." As she moved the mouse down there, he placed his other hand on her collarbone and slid it down. His hand continued to move, taking her modesty with it. "By any chance do you think you could? Can you find a hard copy of this presentation in the file room?" Her voice shook a little. "There's probably one. It'll take a while to find it, but you can help me look." She wobbled a bit with a flushed face on the way to the file room. They locked the door. "Hope you're ready, Karen, because we don't have much time." "Jesus, I'm ready." She clutched him with an open. He gave her a quick kiss, but it wasn't what she wanted. Just then, he turned her around, bent her over a chair, reached under her skirt and pulled her granny panties to the floor. They grabbed a proposal at random and went back into the main office. Karen detoured to the bathroom for a better cleanup. It was still exciting, even though it was in the office, and he was on his next trip. She left work an hour early, and they had sex in his hotel room. When she got home, an hour late, her husband didn't comment. Her only complaint about Jonathan was that he was very controlling, always wanting her to lift this leg, move that way and do this. He never developed a flow that carried and sustained the pleasure. She'd have to mention that next time and be more proactive. Karen thought sex with Jonathan was the most exciting thing that had happened to her in as long as she could remember. It was even better than her trip to Disney World when she was 10. She had been looking forward to this trip like a child looks forward to summer vacation. 2 weeks later, she was disappointed. She thought she wouldn't get a chance to be alone with Jonathan that week because they were taking her mother out for her birthday that night. Martin had scheduled a lunch meeting with her and another person at the Oak Hotel the next day. Jonathan had to meet with clients in Baltimore and had postponed the lunch. He was going back home that evening and checking out of his hotel, so she thought it would be a good idea to go halves and rent a hotel room that afternoon. She found herself happily sitting in the dining room of the Oak Hotel, gazing with a bit of a dreamy look at Jonathan. She was feeling excited and flushed, teased with excitement, squeezing her thighs together and wiggling around in her seat, which she felt a little embarrassed. Her mom used to say that kind of behavior was called twitchy. Everything Jonathan was saying seemed a bit sexy to her, although if someone else were to overhear it, it would just sound like normal boring chat. Her hands were sweaty and she kept sipping ice water so the cold glass would cool them down and he wouldn't think they were clammy, not that he would have cared. He wasn't really focused on her hands. Lunch was over all too soon for Karen. She'd been good all her life, staying on the good. It was funny that her husband was afraid of a wolf too. She giggled out loud because she'd never thought of it before. Jonathan's last name was Lamb. What's so funny, Karen? It wasn't the Flyers game last night, which was what he'd been going on and on about. The waiter gave them the bill. Jonathan signed it. Oh, my husband thinks Martin Wolf is trying to, or already is sleeping with me. And of course he isn't. He never even hinted that he was interested. So my husband is afraid of the wolf when it's a lamb that's after his hen. They both started laughing. That morphed into loud belly laugh hysterics with tears running down their faces. They were all chatting away and Karen suddenly realized she needed the loo. She laughed and said she had to pee. They laughed at her and he gave her the key. She felt sexy, but she didn't have any short skirts, so she rolled up the waistband of one of her shorter ones to show more leg. It had been a long time since Karen had done that, since high school. They stumbled into the elevator, not really noticing that they had company in there. But it didn't really matter. They weren't being lewd or anything. When the door opened onto the 5th floor, Karen rushed out, driven by lust and a full bladder. Both powerful motivators. She didn't notice that when the elevator door shut, no one was with her in the hall, or moments later, in the room, sitting on the toilet, peeing like a mare. She didn't notice that she was alone. She patted herself dry with a wad of toilet paper and let her underpants slide off her feet onto the floor. She didn't bother putting them on again. She giggled out loud. She came into the room unbuttoning her blouse. She called Jonathan, but there was no answer. She closed the door. She looked around the hall, but couldn't see him. She closed the door and wondered what had happened to him. She thought he must have forgotten which room they were in. It didn't make sense. But then lust drives out sense every time. She sat on the bed and waited, eager to do something. She stood up, buttoned her blouse and went into the hall. She planned to go down to the lobby, figuring that if she had the key, he would have had to ask at reception what room he was in. She was almost at the end of the corridor when she heard an elevator going down. She pressed the button twice, hoping to get there more quickly. It seemed to take forever, but when the other elevator finally arrived, the door opened and she saw Jonathan lying on the floor. He was lying loosely in a fetal position, a pool of blood forming. She was horrified, panicked and hyperventilating when she saw his broken nose and shattered mouth. The door started to close on its own, ending her paralysis. She jumped into the elevator to see what she could do, but the doors kept banging back open. She felt some relief when Jonathan moaned and moved a little. He was alive, at least for now. She jabbed the door close button and the lobby button compulsively, maddeningly. The lift seemed to take an age to get to the lobby. When it finally opened, she screamed and shouted for help. She didn't wait for assistance to arrive, but grabbed him under his arms and gave a strong pull, lifting what she could and dragging the rest of him out of the lift. He screamed in pain as his broken ribs shifted, and she began shrieking in pain too when her back went out and her muscles spasmed. As she dropped Jonathan, his head made a thunk as it hit the Tazo floor. She steadied herself, clutching the arm of a chair, unable to straighten up at all. The elevator door was closing on Jonathan's waist, but he was unconscious. Their screams and yelling had got the attention they deserved as two maids from the laundry and the desk clerk came running. The door jamb bell began ringing in the elevator, adding to the commotion. She saw the queer hunchback. A woman was shrieking over her bloody victim. They kept a safe distance and called the manager while the elevator doors marked time, opening and closing, and the bell was ringing to call even more attention, if that was possible. Karen was hunched over, her upper body parallel to the floor, her head cranked sideways, looking up at everybody as she was shouting incoherently about lambs and doctors and wolves and doing something. The manager, who knew a crazy person when he saw one, called the police and an ambulance in that order. He sent the receptionist to get the elevator key and the maid to keep the curious onlookers at a distance. The commotion had attracted their attention, but it had a calming effect. The elevator was locked, which stopped the door rattling and bell ringing. Karen was mortally embarrassed to be caught in a hotel with her lover. She realized it was likely that her reason for being there would come out, and once out, might somehow get back to Chris. If she had been able to walk, she would have done so and left. Jonathan faced his fate in a compromising situation that became even more so when the ambulance arrived and they found no knife or gunshot wounds. This raised the question of what had happened to him. She wanted to know too, of course, but a police investigation might turn up things best left buried. Jonathan's injuries were painful, but they probably weren't life-threatening. She was in a bad way, but she needed to get to the hospital for professional attention. She wasn't related to him, so the police wouldn't let her ride in the ambulance. She was stuck where she was. The police questioned her, asking if he'd been shot. They wanted to know what they should look for. It wasn't her business, but since that wasn't this was the worst case they'd ever seen. They were curious and wanted to get to the bottom of it because their job was often boring and this was interesting. She had no choice but to tell the police what little she knew about the events that had taken place. She had to admit why she and Jonathan were there in the first place. The officer was professional and neutral, but she could see he respected her less. "Mrs. Ryan, do you know who might have assaulted Mr. Lamb? Did you see anyone you recognize?" "I think I recognize the guy in the hotel, but I'm pretty sure I've seen the desk clerk before, and there's no one I know who would want to assault Mr. Lamb. He only comes to Philly a couple of times a month, and he doesn't even know hardly anyone. Are you and your husband on good terms?" "I'm just asking a question." "Yes, we're on good terms." "Do you think he'll be in today?" "I don't know. He works from home and comes and goes." He certainly had no idea that. "I'm sorry I said that wrong." This was a business lunch, and not something that would come to his attention right then. "Well, interview the staff, and check the surveillance cameras. If Mr. Lamb wants us to look into this further, he should file a complaint as soon as he can." Jonathan's car was down the street, but she didn't have the key and couldn't drive it. She was in too much pain to drive herself. Was the hotel manager keen to get rid of her? She was offered a taxi or another ambulance. She chose the taxi, which arrived in moments. The driver held one arm, and the manager the other, as she hobbled painfully to the curb, still bent over parallel to the ground. Faced with the open door to the, she realized that with her back locked she couldn't sit on the seat, so she had to crawl and slowly on all fours to the hospital. She needed the men to lift her first one leg, then the other, so she could eat.